September 1944. Inside a dimly lit headquarters in Northwest Europe, rain taps against canvas and tin. Cigarette smoke hangs low over a table crowded with maps. Red and blue arrows push east toward Germany. The war, at last, seems to be moving fast, too fast. An order arrives from Supreme Headquarters: clear, direct, final, advance according to plan. Conform to the broad front, no exceptions. The general studies the map in silence. Fuel columns are stretched thin. Roads are clogged with refugees and wreckage. The enemy is wounded, but not broken. Following this order, he believes, will slow victory or bleed it away. By the late summer of 1944, the war in Western Europe had entered a dangerous, deceptive phase. The Allied landings in Normandy, launched on June 6, had succeeded beyond their original footholds, but not without cost. For nearly 2 months, American, British, and Canadian forces had been locked in brutal hedgerow fighting, advancing yard by yard through the bocage of northern France. Progress was slow, casualties were steady, morale was strained, but intact. Everything changed in late July. Operation Cobra shattered the German line south of St. Lay. American armor poured through the breach. German formations collapsed in fragments, retreating eastward under constant air attack. By August, Paris was liberated. Entire enemy divisions were destroyed or scattered in the Falaise pocket. For the first time since 1940, Allied forces were racing across open country. At the center of this advance stood General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Allied Commander. His authority extended across national lines, service branches, and egos hardened by years of war. Eisenhower favored a broad front advance, multiple armies moving forward together, maintaining coalition balance while denying the enemy a single decisive blow to counter. On paper, the strategy promised stability. In reality, it collided with an unforgiving constraint: logistics. Ports were damaged or distant, rail lines lay in ruins. Fuel, ammunition, and food had to travel hundreds of miles from Normandy beaches along overcrowded roads. Speed became both the Allies' greatest weapon and their most dangerous liability. The faster the armies moved, the thinner the lifeline behind them became, an imbalance that would soon force commanders to choose between obedience and judgment. Among the Allied field commanders driving east was a general known for impatience with caution and a belief in relentless momentum. He had seen German units break when pressed without pause. He had also watched opportunities vanish when advances were slowed to preserve symmetry rather than exploit weakness. By September, his forces were among the most aggressive on the Western Front, often operating at the very edge of their supply lines. This general commanded troops who slept beside their vehicles, who advanced with fuel measured in hours, not days. Their maps showed bridges still intact across rivers the Germans had not yet organized to defend. To him, the enemy was disoriented, retreating, short of reserves, and vulnerable to a decisive thrust that could rupture the front entirely. Eisenhower, however, faced a different battlefield. As Supreme Commander, he carried responsibility not only for speed, but for cohesion. British and American armies had to advance together, supply had to be shared. Political trust, fragile even in victory, could not be risked by favoring one commander's ambition over the coalition's balance. The disagreement was not personal, it was structural. One man saw a fleeting window to end the war sooner. The other saw the danger of overextension, exposed flanks, and a divided alliance. In September 1944, These two perspectives converged at a single decision point. An order would be issued, a boundary would be drawn. And one general, convinced the moment would never come again, prepared to cross it. The first angle was leadership philosophy. Eisenhower believed wars were won by coordination, not brilliance in isolation. His experience in coalition warfare taught him that unity was itself a weapon. A fractured command even in pursuit of speed invited disaster. His broad front strategy aimed to keep pressure everywhere, deny the Germans time to regroup, and ensure no single Allied army advanced so far that it could be isolated and crushed. The general who resisted him held a different view. He believed modern war rewarded audacity. German defenses, once cracked, did not heal quickly. Momentum, in his mind, was not a byproduct of success, it was the condition for it. Halt an advancing army, even briefly, and the enemy regains coherence. Artillery is repositioned, bridges are blown. Retreat turns into defense. The second angle was tactical reality. On the ground, forward units reported little organized resistance. German rear guards fought delaying actions, then vanished. Prisoners spoke of confusion, fuel shortages, and orders that arrived too late. Reconnaissance showed crossings still open and roads barely defended. To pause now, the general argued, would allow the enemy to trade chaos for structure. The third angle was human pressure. Soldiers who had survived Normandy and the breakout believed the war might end before winter. Letters home reflected optimism mixed with exhaustion. Commanders knew morale surged when advances continued and sagged when they stalled without visible reason. To stop an army in motion was not just a strategic choice. It was a psychological one. The fourth angle was risk tolerance. Eisenhower's caution came from responsibility at scale. A failed thrust could cost tens of thousands of men and threaten the entire front. The defiant general measured risk differently. He weighed the certainty of prolonged fighting against the possibility, however narrow, of decisive victory. Both positions were rational. Both were grounded in experience, and both could not be followed at once. As September deepened, supply officers warned that fuel allocations would be cut. Movement would soon require explicit authorization. The window was closing not in weeks, but in days. And with it came the question that would define the moment, whether a field commander's judgment could override the will of the supreme commander. The fifth angle emerged from the enemy's perspective. German forces in the west were reeling, but not defeated. Field Marshal Walter Model rushed in to stabilize the front, understood that time was his only ally. Every hour gained allowed shattered units to reform, anti-tank guns to be repositioned, and defensive lines to be improvised along rivers and high ground. A rapid Allied thrust threatened to turn retreat into collapse. A pause offered survival. German commanders watched Allied movements closely. They noted where advances slowed and where supply lines thinned. They exploited hesitation with demolition teams and counterattacks just strong enough to force caution. From their vantage point, Allied restraint was not prudence, it was opportunity. The sixth angle was moral and professional risk. Refusing a direct order in wartime carried consequences beyond reputation. It threatened discipline, chain of command, and the precedent it set for others. This general understood that success might justify his decision, but failure would leave no defense. History would not record his intentions, only the outcome. The seventh angle lay in logistics, the silent arbiter of modern war. Fuel convoys were already rationed, artillery ammunition was prioritized for defensive contingencies. Bridges and roads could not support endless movement. Eisenhower's staff argued that an army without fuel was not an army at all, it was a liability. Momentum without sustainment could turn triumph into encirclement. Yet the general saw logistics as a problem to be solved after the breakthrough, not before it. Capture enemy depots, seize ports, force the Germans to abandon supplies in flight. In his calculus, speed created its own sustainment. By mid-September, these angles converged under mounting pressure. Orders tightened, movement corridors were defined. Boundaries were enforced. What had once been informal latitude became rigid instruction. Then came the message from Supreme Headquarters, explicit in its language, leaving no room for interpretation. Advance limits were set. Priority went elsewhere. The general was instructed to halt and realign. September 9, 1944. Forward command posts along the Allied front hum with activity. Radios crackle. Dispatch riders arrive coated in dust. Fuel reports are read twice, then set aside. The order from Supreme Headquarters is now unmistakable. Halt major advances beyond assigned boundaries. Conserve fuel. Prepare for coordinated movement across the front. The general does not dispute the order's clarity. He disputes its timing. At first light, armored columns continue rolling east. Recon units push ahead of authorized lines, reporting intact bridges and light resistance. Infantry follows in trucks and on foot, moving faster than supply officers had planned for. No announcement is made. No formal refusal is transmitted. The advance simply continues. At higher headquarters, the deviation becomes impossible to ignore. Situation maps begin to diverge from expectation. Liaison officers request clarification. Staff officers hesitate before passing questions upward. The war has taught them that some decisions are intentional precisely because they are not spoken aloud. By midday, German rear guards attempt to slow the advance with scattered artillery fire. It is ineffective. Allied armor bypasses resistance rather than engaging it. Prisoners are taken in groups, not companies. Roadblocks crumble under pressure. Each mile gained reinforces the general's belief that stopping now would surrender the advantage. But the strain is visible. Fuel trucks lag behind. Maintenance crews work beside roads under open sky. Units operate on verbal estimates rather than confirmed resupply. Commanders know that one miscalculation could leave spearheads immobile. Late in the afternoon, Supreme Headquarters responds. Messages arrive reminding all field commanders that operational control rests at the top. The language is measured, but firm. Compliance is expected. Deviations will not be sustained. The general reads the message without comment. His decision is already in motion. To halt now would strand forward units even farther from supply. The only viable option, in his assessment, is to push through to force success before scarcity intervenes. As evening falls, German demolitions begin along key routes ahead. Bridges are prepared for destruction. The enemy is no longer retreating blindly, they are reacting. The gamble has reached its point of no return. What began as an unauthorized continuation now threatens to become a defining confrontation between command authority and battlefield reality. And as darkness settles over the front, both sides prepare for the next day, one seeking to exploit momentum, the other racing to contain it. September 10, 1944. Dawn breaks over columns that have barely paused through the night. engines idle low to conserve fuel. Maps are updated with pencil marks, uncertain and provisional. The advance has gained ground, but at a cost now becoming unavoidable. German resistance stiffens sharply. Units that had dissolved days earlier reappear along rivers and choke points. Anti-tank guns are dug in near bridges. Demolition charges detonate just minutes before Allied armor reaches the crossings. Where speed once opened doors, it now meets prepared obstacles. Fuel shortages turn from concern to crisis. Some spearhead units report less than a quarter tank remaining. Vehicles are siphoned to keep a few moving, while others are abandoned by the roadside. Artillery support thins as ammunition allocations are tightened. The advance, still dangerous, is no longer fluid. At Supreme Headquarters, the situation crystallizes. Eisenhower's staff recognizes the risk of a localized collapse if the forward elements are cut off. Orders are issued again, this time more direct. The general is instructed to halt immediately and realign with the broader front. This is no longer guidance, it is command. Reluctantly, the advance slows. Forward units dig in on exposed ground they had not planned to hold. Engineers scramble to construct crossings under fire. The moment of decision of potential breakthrough has passed. German forces seize the reprieve. Defensive lines form along natural barriers. What might have been a rout settles into resistance. The enemy has time again, and with it, control. By the end of the day, the general complies. The refusal has run its course, not through discipline, but through physics. Armies move on fuel, not conviction. The gamble, bold and calculated, collides with the limits Eisenhower had warned of. No court-martial follows, no public reprimand is issued. The war demands unity more than punishment. But the episode leaves its mark on planning, on trust, and on the understanding that even justified defiance carries consequences. As the front stabilizes, attention turns to what has been gained, what has been lost, and what this moment reveals about victory delayed by inches and days. In the days that followed, the battlefield settled into an uneasy pause. The unauthorized advance had gained territory, but not decision. German forces, though battered, remained coherent. Rivers once nearly crossed now marked defensive lines. Towns taken without resistance required garrisons. The price of speed became responsibility. Casualty reports reflected the ambiguity of the outcome. Losses were not catastrophic, but they were real men killed or wounded in engagements that might never have occurred had the advance halted earlier. Vehicles abandoned for lack of fuel-littered roads that would soon be needed again. Maintenance units worked to recover what could be salvaged. At Supreme Headquarters, assessments were measured and professional. Eisenhower did not frame the incident as insubordination, but as a lesson in limits. In staff discussions and post-operation reports, the emphasis returned again and again to logistics. The war, they concluded, was not lost through caution, but it could be prolonged by impatience. The general's record remained intact. His judgment was respected, even if his decision was questioned. No formal reprimand entered his file. The coalition could not afford fractures among its senior commanders while Germany still fought. German intelligence, for its part, noted the pause with relief. Reports from the front spoke of Allied hesitation and supply strain. The brief window of chaos had closed. What followed was no longer pursuit, but preparation for both sides. As September gave way to October, the front hardened. The refusal faded from headlines and briefings, but its implications lingered. The war would continue into winter, shaped in part by a moment when momentum outpaced sustainment. The refusal of an order in 1944 was not an act of defiance for its own sake. It was a collision between two truths of war. One held that momentum could end conflicts before they hardened into attrition. The other understood that armies collapsed not from courage, but from exhaustion and scarcity. Eisenhower commanded a coalition, not just a battlefield. His authority rested on restraint as much as resolve. The general who pushed forward embodied the opposite instinct, the belief that history rewards those who move fastest when the enemy falters. Both were shaped by the same war. Both sought the same victory. What this moment reveals is not a failure of leadership, but its burden. Command demands judgment under uncertainty, where the cost of action and inaction are equally invisible. In 1944, that balance delayed the end, but preserved the unity that made victory possible at all.